Welcome to Change It Up Radio. I'm your host, Paula Shaw, and we have a very special show today. I'm doing something new that I'm calling my Reflections Show, and joining me to chat about so many of the things that we were made aware of or that we learned through the shows of the fall season will be my dear friend and coach, Ellen McCarty. She is a life performance coach and a success coach. And her whole goal with her clients is to help them live a great life, even when life is lifing. So, Ellen is going to be joining me in just a moment. Just want to remind everybody that if you'd like to learn more about my work as a life transition coach, helping people dealing with the upheaval of change, you can get all that info on paulashaw.com. My 3 books are available on amazon.com. The first one I wrote was Chakras, the Magnificent 7, which is all about balancing those energy centers that work with body, mind, and spirit. My second book was Grief, When Will This Pain Ever End? And that's a kind of a compendium of articles and tools and processes to help you move through your grief and not get stuck in it. And then finally, my most recent book, Saying the Right Thing When You Don't Know What to Say, is all about knowing what helps create a productive conversation and what doesn't work as far as having a good, productive conversation with someone who's in emotional pain. So please check those books out on amazon.com and join us for this show every week. You can find us on every major podcast platform. So subscribe so we get the latest shows out to you right away. All right. So I think without much further ado, I want to introduce to you my friend Ellen, who has done so many things in her lifetime. She's been a business and marketing strategist. She has worked with cancer programs at Tufts and other huge universities. She's been a death doula, helping people in those final days. And she's come to really be an expert on what really matters to people in the very end. And that's why I think she's such a perfect person, not only to chat with me about some of the highlights of our fall season, which was called Giants on the Road Less Traveled, but she's also going to be joining me in the next few weeks as we do a series on grief and the holidays, because this is a tough time of year for people who are dealing with loss. And I want to do everything I can to offer help and offer insights, awareness, and just whatever is needed to help grievers not feel so alone at this time of year. So stay with us in the coming weeks and hang on, because you're about to meet Ellen McCarty, and we are going to explore all of the beautiful lessons and learnings of the fall season, Giants on the Road Less Traveled. So stay with us right here on Change It Up Radio. Oh, and don't forget, if you want to hear past shows, and you probably will after you hear us talking about them, and if you want to learn anything about being a guest or a sponsor on this show, you can get all that information on changeitupradio.com. That's changeitupradio.com. And I've got a free gift for you on my website. Almost forgot to tell you. It's called 20 Things to Say and Not to Say to People in Emotional Pain. It's taken right from my book, Saying the Right Thing When You Don't Know What to Say. And trust me, this free gift will be something you'll want to keep in your purse or in the glove box, so you'll be ready whenever those tough conversations come up. All right, without any further ado, here's my talk with Ellen McCarty, looking at the fall season of Change It Up Radio. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Change It Up Radio. I am your host, Paula Shaw, and I'm so glad you're here today because we are going to have some fun. I'm going to be hanging out with one of my best friends, Ellen McCarty. Ellen is a life performance and success coach, and she is all about helping her clients live a great life, even when life is lifing. You know what I mean? Yeah, when she told me that line for the first time, I was like, "Oh my God, that's brilliant. That's your tagline." But Ellen and I are going to just chat today about all the amazing shows we had in the fall season that we called Giants on the Road Less Traveled. We had some amazing guests, and I want to start incorporating in my show, taking time to just reflect on some of the learnings, some of the insights, some of the awarenesses that came from having some very interesting conversations with some very interesting people. So, Ellen, let's get going. I'm dying to start talking about Chad Stewart, who
Yes.
is the author of the Britfield series. Chad's been our guest a couple of times. A brilliant man, incredible. This man is more productive than any human
Mm.
I've ever encountered. I mean, he not only is he writing a 7-book series, and he's now released 3 of those books.
Mm.
He wrote a play, and it was performed last month at a middle school in, I believe it was Mission Viejo, and everybody adored it. Adored it. Like, it just got rave reviews from everybody. He has got um, educational pursuits. That's one of the things I love so much about Britfield. He's very focused on educating kids. So it's
Mhm.
not a magical kind of a series like Harry Potter. It's present day. It's very accurate in terms of the geography of the countries where these kids, Tom and Sarah, are. And every reference in it is accurate. So kids can actually learn about London, learn about Paris. In the 3rd book, they learn about Italy. So I just think his mission, his goals, his can't quite think of the word I want, but the outcomes that he hopes for in creating these books are so right on. And the biggest thing that he's trying to do is really bring creativity back
Mm.
into the classroom.
Mm.
And that's huge. Absolutely huge, right?
Yeah, I love that so much. And you started out by saying how organized he was, and all I could think of was him talking about his spreadsheets. It was amazing. It was like, wow, wow, wow. And and you had said something about, because he doesn't have others to care for, right?
Uh-huh.
And that whole thing, like how organized you can really
Yes.
get and how focused to give forth a gift like that.
Mm-hmm.
And Paula, for me too, when I listened to this interview, it was like, wow, this creative education, the genre is 8 to 10 year olds. Is that right? It's something like
Yeah.
that. It's young
Yeah.
adult.
And yet I know a lot of adults who adored his books and who, I mean, people of all ages. I couldn't put the first one down when I was reading it. And I think kids of even, like my assistant's daughter, who I believe is in the 3rd grade, has read the books and adored them. So it really runs a big gamut of
Well, I think
ages.
that's sort of the genre of young adult because it may be geared towards that, but boy, do we adults love it as well. If you ever get an opportunity to find a writer
Absolutely.
in a genre that is
Yeah.
thrilling, that was Harry Potter,
Oh, for sure.
that's expanded to everything. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everybody adored Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And another thing that Chad talked about that I loved so much, and I think it's an important point to make, is I believe the way he said it was behind every overnight success is
Mm.
probably 1 to 2 decades of
Mm-hmm.
work,
Mm-hmm.
and between 8 and 10,000 hours honing your craft.
Mm.
And what I love about that is he shares that every time. He speaks at schools all the time,
Yeah.
and he's basically saying to the kids, find what you love and then put the time in. to becoming really excellent at it. And that, I think, is a really critical message, especially in this day and age of instant gratification, and short attention spans.
But what thrills me about that approach, Paula, is that find what you love and then give time to it. I mean, our nature is to lose track of time when we're doing things that we love.
Yes.
So it is sort of that permission being given, right? An example of permission granted to do what I love, and therefore I lose track of time. I do all of these things. His MO is the spreadsheets and the organization and all of that.
Right.
And it's over the top. He's amazing, and he's hitting every goal he ever had.
Yes.
And he's really educating. That history and geography and all of that is amazing in what he's providing, and the ability for the kids, like you said, to create, and dream sort of outside the box.
Absolutely. And for me, this just so resonates because I had my children in Waldorf school, because Waldorf school is so focused on creativity and not having kids on screens from the time they're small, letting them create their own books and stuff as they're learning the sounds of the letters to learn to read. It was a very creative environment, and both of the children are very creative. A lot of the research says if you don't really allow creative pursuits up to the age of 7, at 7, the brain matures to a place where that can just get shut down and it can just get preoccupied with linear thinking.
Wow.
So you really want to, it's so funny. So many of the things when I was going to school were backwards. Like we didn't start learning languages till the 7th grade. You're supposed to start that like as soon as you can talk. And the same thing with creativity. You didn't do your science projects and your creative projects until high school. So
that's an interesting point. And I really feel like Chad is onto it with that stuff. He is totally exploding it and showing a whole new way of doing it.
Totally.
That's more in tune with nature, the way that it actually works and the way we absorb and grow.
It's a really, really good point. Let's move on to one of my other favorite. Well, all these people were amazing, and I learned so much. Amazing. Steve Little. I say a giant called Little because this is a beautiful human being. And he is so wise, and he so walks his talk, and he so lives what he believes. But I think probably one of the biggest lessons from Steve was the discussion regarding Ho'oponopono, which for our listeners is a spiritual method used by Hawaiians. It originated with Hawaiians, but people use it all over the world now. But the basic idea of Ho'oponopono is if something shows up in your life, it's yours to clean. It showed up for a reason, even if you didn't bring it actively into your life, even if it almost has nothing to do with you. Like one of the women in a workshop I was listening to on Ho'oponopono, she was talking about how she would clean on the issues her husband would talk about when he came home from work every day, what was happening in the business. Now, she had really nothing to do with that except listening to him. But it was in her experience, right? It's her husband's business. So what you do when you're cleaning on Ho'oponopono, for our listeners, is you use 4 phrases. You just say, I'm sorry. I love you. Please forgive me. And thank you. Now, for a long time, I didn't indulge myself in using this because I didn't quite get it. I didn't know who I was apologizing to if I didn't do anything wrong, right?
Right. I'm okay.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't making sense to me, but 2 things really made sense to me, and Steve brought them to my attention. So one, you don't have to really get it intellectually. If it showed up in your experience, clean on it. Just clean on it. The other one is that you can think of it as apologizing to your inner child, because
Mm.
your child is affected by everything that comes into her experience. So, like this woman that I heard, her husband's, she wasn't going into the office every day, but her husband was in her
Mm-hmm.
experience, and this was his business that was providing for her in life. So she just kept cleaning on it. And here's the crazy thing: even though she didn't even know any of the people involved, everything in the business started resolving itself, and the profits came in and the
Yeah.
problems went away.
Yeah. If I can say one thing about that, Paula, you really, after I listened to it, I think we had spoken about it, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
wait a minute. I was sort of stuck with the same thing, like, wait, I'm okay with it. I don't need to apologize and clean it up. But
Right.
when you just said what you said this time, I'm getting a whole new awareness that came to me. Like, so what you had said was, yeah, you could be taught. We were discussing talking to your child,
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I love you. I'm so sorry. Like, sorry you had to go
Right.
through this,
Right.
please forgive me for whatever, like
Mm-hmm.
being in that position or whatever. And thank you. But when you just said it, it reminded me of like having the rule in a marriage where, if you're the one that doesn't like dirty dishes, go ahead and clean it up. It was the cleaning it up bit. It was
Ah,
like, if it's in your experience and it's bothering you, clear it.
yes.
And you're doing
Exactly.
that for the collective consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So that
Exactly.
was the other. So there's almost these polar opposites. It was fascinating to me. And you pointed that
Absolutely.
out to me about being individual, and now have pointed that out to me regarding the
Yeah.
collective consciousness. So
Absolutely.
that's beautiful.
And one of the other points Steve made that I loved was, once we get the lesson, we don't have to keep having the experience over and over again. I'm sure there are listeners right now who are going, is it just my karma to find every self centered asshole out there? I've had women sit in my office and men and say that. But obviously, there is something there. There's a lesson that's not being learned, not being received. And so, yeah, then we have to repeat the experience until we get it. So I thought
What's
that was
interesting about
wonderful.
those 2 points is if you bring Ho'oponopono to that last point,
Mm-hmm.
then you free it all up,
Yeah,
right?
right.
You don't have to keep learning it because you're actually forgiving yourself and you're
Yes.
forgiving others and you're clearing it and cleaning it.
And
It was
and that
fascinating.
that is a way of learning it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you can accept, even though you didn't create the situation,
Right.
that it's in your experience, as part of your life, do something about it.
Yeah.
That
It's
is a
in your
way of
experience, it's
learning.
about your life, and it doesn't feel good. So you
Yeah,
actually do have the opportunity to change it,
exactly.
clean it.
Exactly.
That's exciting.
So moving on to
Yeah.
Gina Warfel, who was
Gina.
just a little ball of energy and
She's
light.
amazing.
I love her. I just love her. And what I really liked about what she was sharing, you may recall, she is a master nutrition coach and works with
Yeah.
women in getting fit and losing weight. And, she explained something about the brain that just tied right in with what I know from energy psychology. And that
Mm.
point was that whenever we feel threatened in any way, so that could come from a stressful situation, it could come from a breakup in a relationship, it
Mm-hmm.
could come from something terrible happening at the office. When those things happen to us, the survival part of the brain, the amygdala, goes on high alert. And
Mm.
it's because it starts kind of scanning like a searchlight. Am I safe? Am I safe?
Mm.
Am I safe? And when the amygdala turns on, it does so at the cost of the frontal cortex, which is the thinking brain. And
Mm.
that's why when we're emotional, we aren't necessarily thinking clearly, intellectually, and logically.
I love this.
So that's one of the reasons that often when that amygdala kicks in, it doesn't matter how committed you were to your diet or your resolve about something you weren't going to eat or drink, because your brain is in survival mode. And as a doctor I used to work with, used to always say, the brain will always win. The brain will
Oh
always win
no.
because it's the survival mechanism,
Right,
right?
right.
And one of the things Gina pointed out is, so rather than being angry at ourselves or trying to really force it, and this is going to be kind of right up your alley, it was more like flow with it. Understand that something's going on, maybe with your inner child, maybe with a part of you that's lived through a certain kind of trauma, something that lives in your subconscious mind you may not be totally aware of. And so soothing yourself with love, asking yourself what's really going on, taking that time rather than just immersing ourselves in a craving and then hating ourselves for the next 24 hours.
It's such a cycle, right? It's such a
Exactly.
cycle. It can be.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the brilliant things that she really brought out, because I've known a lot of people that have struggled with weight over the years, and there are famous people that we've watched do the yo-yo dieting thing for years. And what is the problem? Everybody always wonders, well, why can't they just lose weight? They just don't have discipline. Well, it's not just about discipline. It's
It's
about
so interesting because I think you brought out in her in that interview in particular how it really is about self-talk, right? I mean, she's onto it, that she has that already,
yeah,
right? That perspective though is so incredibly valuable. And it's like, if we
yes,
can look at, I think she said it was like her experience of dieting was she'd get up in the morning all like ready to go and put on the
right.
war paint. No, she was going to tackle the day, only to come
Mhm.
home defeated and start this guilt cycle or shame cycle,
Right.
right? and
Yeah.
and she did such a wonderful job. Your conversation was very explicit about how we actually drop into that conversation, how we can witness it happening, and how we don't
Mhm.
have to own it. She was
Yeah.
really talking about really coming into peace with your body, mind, and spirit about all
Yes.
of that. That was really extraordinary, interesting conversation.
It was very extraordinary. and
Yeah,
and I think it would speak to anybody, whether you
absolutely.
have the similar spiritual beliefs or whether you've ever heard of an inner child or not. We all know those feelings we get. And now I think, it helps people to understand better when you're scared, when you're traumatized,
Mm,
when you're
mm.
not feeling secure. The amygdala freaks out and it goes into high gear. And this shuts off the frontal cortex, the thinking brain shuts off because it's about survival now. Because the amygdala is that part of the brain that gears us up for fight, flight, or freeze.
So,
Right?
Paula, this is classic you right now because I don't know if your listeners understand that, or like, I think we all understand it when we're told it. And
Yeah.
it may come up here and there, but when you say that in this situation, she could be talking about anything,
Mm-hmm.
right? In a way, she could be talking about anything. Her
Right.
expertise is in nutrition,
Right.
right? And about mastering emotions and your mindset and, how all
Mm-hmm.
those triggers. Fabulous. And when you bring that science to it, I feel this great relief, like, oh, it's not just me. It's like that thing shut off. There's a science to this, why I'm
Yes.
unable to access it. There's a lot of relief in that podcast. That was
Oh,
really
yeah.
freeing.
And the other thing to remember is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems, they just go into effect automatically. We don't get to say, oh, no, I don't want to have that response. Your brain and your body are in gear. And that's why understanding it, soothing yourself a little bit can be the best thing. And that kind of is a perfect lead in for me to Janine Thompson,
Oh my,
whose book 911 from Your Soul, that was the show that came next. And Janine talks about actually putting one hand on your heart and one hand on your belly when you're feeling that sense of, oh God, I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's coming, or, everything seems like it's upside down and totally screwed up. And just breathing. And Janine talked a lot about all of the wonderfulness that can come from stillness, from just getting quiet and connecting with your body, with yourself. And I thought that was really powerful, because in a time and space where, as Steve Little calls it, we're all about efforting, we're always trying to effort to stay alive and to make the money we need and to provide for our families and do all the things we have to do. At a time when we're all so geared toward efforting, this idea of just be still, just sit quietly, just listen, is such a foreign concept.
And in that conversation, the way that it went, in my experience, was the access of, in the stillness, sort of therein lies all the answers, right? Like in the stillness, you have access to asking better questions. That's not what she said, I'm paraphrasing, but sort of making higher quality choices about things, right?
True.
And she did call it a pause.
Panic.
Yeah, she did call it a pause, which I talk about. But it was also that you could kind of get the information, the highest information for your benefit.
Yes.
In that stillness.
Totally.
And yeah, I know a lot of people that I work with have a hard time being in action. And sometimes inaction is the most productive thing. And that's what she demonstrates in that interview. It's extraordinary.
Say that again. Sometimes what is the most productive thing?
Inaction.
Inaction
can be the most, it's exponentially impactful. And she really alludes to this. Everybody should listen to that interview, Paula. That's it. She talks about that. Inside that, you can do these bigger leaps, and where you have access to better quality decisions and higher information that comes from a place that is serving your higher self.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, when Ellen says inaction, she is talking about without action, not in action.
Correct.
Without action.
Being without action. Stillness is scary, Paula, particularly for entrepreneurs and people that are up to things in their world. And we're all so busy and we're trying to recover or create. And there's a lot of new things going on. Stillness can feel like dead in the water, but she really takes a different slice on that really shows you how valuable that can be. I think that's an extraordinary
really does. And she's walked the full gamut. She was that person who was efforting, flying all over the country, working with people and doing all of that, and has learned what she is now teaching through her own life experience. So it's beautiful.
Brilliant.
She's a lovely woman.
Yeah.
Ellen, we've got to take a quick break. Okay. But when we come back, we're going to talk about your friend Don Myers. Stained glass and radical honesty.
Right on.
All right, we will be right back. Welcome back to Change It Up Radio. I am your host, Paula Shaw, and with me today is my good buddy, Ellen McCarty, who is a life performance and success coach. And her whole mission is just to help her clients live a great life, even when life is lifing. And those days, we've all had them when life is lifing. So, Ellen, we have been discussing all of the giants on the road less traveled that I interviewed in the fall, in our fall season of Change It Up Radio. And we have come to Don Myers, who you actually brought to me. Yes. Don Myers, who is a master stained glass artist and also seems to have mastered something called radical honesty. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about what you think radical honesty is all about?
Well, I think that the key formula when it comes to my experience of Dawn expressing radical honesty, the
Mm-hmm.
key piece in that is um, he always comes from love.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
the key piece. So that interview was, so I knew it was an important message. And Dawn is radically honest in the interview and out there
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways. Not a lot of ways. I mean, he's not out there, but he really was straightforward, radically
Oh,
honest
yes.
throughout the
He's not
interview.
the
And it was
usual
very
guy.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And as I said, when I brought him to you, the thing that has always thrilled me, and I've known Don for decades, and is that no matter who you are, he's gonna tell you the truth. But what you culled out of him that I thought was really amazing, Paula, was when do you hold back?
Yes.
And do you hold back on telling the truth?
Well,
And I
that
thought,
was, I'm sorry, go ahead, finish your
I
thought.
thought that was amazing what it elicited. If you want to comment, that's great. Yeah.
I was going to say, because one of the things that really was a question for me
Mm,
is, what is the difference between radical honesty and cruelty?
that's
Because sometimes we don't tell the truth because we don't want to hurt somebody.
mm,
And then that's when he brought up that point that you just made, because I always do it coming from love. And
yeah.
so if loving someone would suggest that it's better you don't give them the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so to speak, then the loving thing is to do that and
And I
not
think
to.
that you pulled this out of him, which I think was an amazing connection right in that moment in that interview. But what he said was, if you care enough, so if you're in this relationship, you already have a relationship with them. You love them, on some level. So
Mm-hmm.
you may not say it to them in front of other people in a particular situation,
Right, right.
but that it would be due an honest conversation,
Yes.
off
In
the
the
grid
right
at another
time and
time.
place.
Do you remember
Yes,
that?
I
That was
do.
phenomenal. That was digging deeper than I've known
Mm-hmm.
Don's framing to be,
Mm-hmm.
in my own experience. I
Mm-hmm.
always get a kick out of him because it doesn't matter if you're the mayor or you're, like a student, it doesn't matter who you are.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing. If you're a client, um,
I loved it that he said that what we're all on the planet for is love and service. And
mm,
so, as a teacher, if he isn't honest, how does he help a student become
mm,
better?
mm,
But obviously, there's a way of doing it that's a more loving way. And then a person can hear it better. And I know, I mean, I can hear a lot of really huge criticisms if they're put to me in a kind way. But if
yes.
something is just too blunt or too unexpected and feeling attacking, then, like so many people, I go deaf on whatever that person is saying.
That's why I thought it was important to distinguish that part where it's not
Yes.
radical honesty in the moment. Like, he gave that example of the chef that's a friend that made your food and, it wasn't good. And
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
you just go, no, this is terrible in the moment? Or do you
Mm-hmm.
say, hey, so look, afterwards,
Yeah.
and you say, I love you and I want this to be straight up, and
Yes.
and I just think that's really awesome. It's not about holding back or not telling your truth in the moment. It's
Mm-hmm.
that if you come from unconditional love or love,
Yeah.
which Dawn assumes that you have for the person if you're interacting anyway, which I loved,
Mm-hmm. And I love
you
the way
know?
you just put that. So it's not that you aren't going to tell the truth. You're going to find the right time and place to do it kindly and lovingly
Mm-hmm,
so the person can hear you.
mm-hmm.
Because if it's an embarrassing moment anyway, your truth probably is going to fall on deaf ears because
Oh, there's no
excuse
way to
me,
receive it.
right?
There's no, you're in that moment where you're like, oh my God, like you're calling me out. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's really key to the way that Don actually behaves in life and makes an
Mm-hmm.
impact in his art and music and his radical honesty. It was a very
Yeah.
interesting interview.
But yeah, Don was a real fun interview because he's not like the average guy who's out walking around there. And so it was very refreshing. I especially liked his story about if people were only honest in a bar. And before you waste your $10 on a drink, he said, why don't you just look the woman in the eyes and say, could you see yourself having sex with me? And if she says no, don't waste your $10.
Save your $10. And he followed that up. That was the piece that thrilled me. He followed it up with, everybody's just out there lying, Paula. You've been lied to at bars, right?
Yes,
and,
that's right.
you know, and it was so funny and so releasing when it sounded so shocking, you know, to the ears for a moment. You know, it was like, what? Yeah.
Oh yeah, he was fun.
And his 2 ways to change the world too were off the graph and also really appropriate.
Mm-hmm. And what were the 2
that
ways?
to the listeners? Oh, well, one was if I could, you know, change anything in the world, he said off the record.
Yeah.
Everyone walks around naked.
Oh, that's right.
Remember that?
That's right.
Because you would have nothing to hide. And as he explained it, it was not a sexual thing. It was a transparency thing. It was another way to, you know, just be who you really are and not make excuses for it and tell the truth so that we're not tap dancing.
Yeah.
And the other one was everyone needed therapy. So, I mean, he was just great.
Pretty true.
It was awesome. and by therapy, I think new perspective. So anyway, that was incredible. That was fun. Different.
And then the next show that was very, very special for me was my dad and his friend, Jerry Ackerman. And for any of our listeners who missed this show or missed their first show, Dad and Jerry met at Camp Pendleton during World War II. They trained together, and then they were all on the same ship on their way to Okinawa for the invasion of Okinawa. First, they got to Pearl Harbor all together, but then they got separated, and it happened very suddenly. So there was no time to say goodbye or to get phone numbers or addresses or any of that. And obviously, we didn't have phones or internet back then, cell phones anyway. So Dad and Jerry lost touch with each other for over 77 years. And last May, I was able to be the vehicle through which they saw each other for the first time in 77 years on this show. That you can watch the Zoom video of them seeing each other for the first time. Oh, it was the most precious, wonderful moment. And then we got to follow it up by them actually meeting, because Jerry and his wife were coming out here for his granddaughter's wedding here in San Diego, of all the crazy coincidences. And so his son, Peter, and I put our heads together, and we came up with the vehicle for them to actually meet in person. And I'm telling you, there was not a dry eye in the house. And then, of course, we had a couple of days to spend time with each other and to get to know each other. And my daughters just had a beautiful article on the whole story printed on Upworthy, which is an online news service for positive stories. And she did a beautiful job just kind of telling the whole story. But one of the things in so many of the quotes that she made were, we all felt the same way. It was just magical. It was just magical. Like somehow, whatever the energies were that brought Dad and Jerry together, that attracted them to their friendship, it got passed down through the genes and in the families, because we all just loved each other and had such a beautiful experience being together. So that show that we just did this last fall was kind of 6 months after the reunion. How's everybody doing? And again, I was just so honored and delighted to be able to facilitate these two coming together again and just delighting in each other's company.
Do you have like a moment, because I saw the connection on video and I've seen it over and over and over again, and talk about not a dry eye on any of this.
Yes.
And what's really you feel like a peeping Tom on a profound moment in life that so many don't ever have, certainly in this genre, right?
Right.
And when those two saw each other and embraced each other, I'm tearing up right now just even thinking about it. I mean, the love and the joy and it was just incredible to witness. And when you were talking with your dad on your interview, the follow-up 6 months later and sort of revisiting it, what do you think was one of the most, I mean, there's so many things, but Paula, for you, what like went, right through you about what you got to create for your dad to experience? You and Jerry's son did this, like you made this opportunity occur for them. And when you see the way that they embraced it and embraced each other, it was like, this is God's work. This is like this is joy. This is beauty. This is celebration. It was like really amazing. What happened for you personally?
I think the core of the whole story is the power of love.
Yeah.
When you really think about it, like when they saw each other, and by the way, for my listeners, this little video Ellen's talking about, my daughter Erin put on Instagram, and it got over 2 million views because everybody was so deeply touched when they saw these two 96-year-old men holding their arms open and then hugging each other. It was all about love. It was our love for our fathers that, kind of sustained Peter and I through all the talking and planning we needed to do. It was the love for each other and for what they were doing. It was love of the men they served. And when we took them to Camp Pendleton, oh my God, the love and respect that was shown to them by the soldiers, male and female, who are there today. Oh my goodness. It was, talk about a feel-good story. I get chills just talking about it now. But it was really one of those stories that it doesn't matter what kind of a mood you're in. When you see that little 30-second video, and then you hear these two talking and loving each other and talking about how they still keep in touch. They talk on the phone every so often. They were invited to be on the Kelly Clarkson show, but it didn't work out because Jerry couldn't travel that far. But it's just a beautiful, amazing story and just fit right in with the lineup of other giants that we were talking to during this fall season.
Those are giants over time, space, reality, like, oh my God, 70 years. And there wasn't a moment that they knew each other's souls in that second.
Yes.
And if you think
I love that you said that. I think they knew each other's souls from the first minute they met.
When they first met, and then they got to see each other again. And that's exactly what it looks like. And I encourage people to listen back to your interview with your dad afterwards as well, because there's some really great insights about, how that experience was for him and what was important and how that lingers and expands.
Oh, so true. So true.
Yeah.
And
so
now in summary, we completed that fall season that I called Giants on the Road Less Traveled with Melinda Hale, who is an extraordinary woman, a singer, an actress, an activist, a mom, a wife. She's just extraordinary and one of the most intelligent, lovely people. She has her own podcast called #We Need to Talk. I wish I'd thought of that when my kids were growing up. It's been a great moment. They're screwing up and you just go, We need to talk.
Well, we need to talk. That's awesome.
But Melinda, boy, she opened my eyes in many, many ways. One was with the word intersectionality. I had never heard it before. Have you heard that?
Nope.
So, intersectionality is a term that basically means if you're going to be an activist about something, cover all the aspects of it. Like, for example, if you're going to be in a discussion or you're going to march for women's rights in terms of salaries, equality of salaries, then you also need to look at Black women's experience in terms of salaries, perhaps physically challenged women's experience in terms of salaries, Asian women, Hispanic women. Intersectionality is basically like, let's look at every facet of the story so we really have the whole story.
Wow, it's like the center of the spoke of the wheel, and there's all these spokes that go out, right? And let's take it as a whole. And yeah, that's fascinating.
It's a perfect analogy. It's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And I think so often activists jump on one bandwagon and they're not seeing the whole picture. They're not bringing the whole picture to people. And so she was fascinating in talking about that. Another thing she talked about that I had never given any thought to is the similarities and the unity between Black people and Jews, both of whom have suffered being marginalized, being stereotyped, being hated, being isolated, all of this in the hands of their life experiences. Fascinating. I would not have put those two groups together.
You've just completely triggered something for me, and I'm going to say it is that's so intriguing that we've never, you were saying the Jews and the Blacks and that whole marginalization and everything that goes on, and we can bring that to the entire LGBTQ
totally
community, because that's how I was relating to it. I was like, well, I grew up in a town where we had they were called Metco students, which were the Black students of Boston. They would be bused into the suburbs to go to school with us. But I grew up like Cape Verdean, African American, whatever, we didn't call them that, but it was such a mixing pot, right? But the marginalized, separated, segregated community was that of the LGBTQ.
Yes.
So it's interesting. It's like that's so cool. I didn't put that together till you just said that.
Well, talking with Melinda actually did give me hope. Sometimes when I look at where our country is today and some of the things going on, it doesn't fill me with hope. But what did fill me with hope is we talked about things like, I remember an Oscars show where Black people protested because there were no Black Oscar nominees. There were no interracial families. I mean, now you cannot turn on the TV without seeing shows with Black leads, with interracial families, with a lot. And so, yes, we have a long way to go, but some good stuff is happening.
Yeah, a long way to go because they're all human. Right? They're just human beings. Why are we identifying them? But I love this.
Yeah, I think that people's hearts and minds are opening up.
Yes.
And they are realizing that it doesn't matter what the outer covering looks like. We all have hearts and brains and the same organs, and it all works the same way. We all love our families. We all want to be safe and secure and provide and have a wonderful world for our children. And so really, my hope is that people are moving to a place where they can see that there are more similarities than there are differences.
And that interview is great for cracking open because you were like, well, it made me feel hopeful. Right? In areas where I know you're also naturally hopeful.
Yes.
I'm just going to say that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's a good pitch to go and listen and see what cracks open for you, right? For your listeners
I love
in that
that.
conversation.
I love that. Yeah.
I do too. That was special.
And so now, Ellen, in conclusion here, I would like to tell our listeners a little bit about what we're going to be doing together in the next couple of shows, because your background as a death doula, as you have very cleverly named it, and my background as a grief expert just put us in a place where we cannot ignore the fact that the holidays are here and people who have suffered loss, whether that's a job loss, a health loss, a family member who passed on, um, a home loss, whatever that loss is, all loss produces grief. And this is a very hard time of the year to be grieving. And so on the next couple of shows, Ellen's going to join me and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about why it's a hard time of year to be grieving. We're going to talk about what are some things people can do to help deal with their pain, to get through this time in a productive, growthful way, rather than just, letting it shrink you or make you feel stuck or hard or even more hopeless. We don't want that, because there is growth that can come out of walking through an experience like this. And that's what we hope to bring to you in the next few shows. And then in the new year, we're going to be looking at grief a lot more. That's kind of my baby, that's the core of my expertise. And even though I've always looked at change as being a kind of a grief experience, because nothing can change unless something goes. And so there's got to be loss for there to be change. But I think we're just going to be looking at it more directly and more hopefully productively in the next couple of shows that Ellen and I are going to do together.
Yeah, and I'm super excited about this, Paula, because as you know, your work has been very impactful in my own personal life and losses. And I think one of the major things is that, in that, for me personally, and I think other people, when you're in that desperate moment, it was like, I don't even know what to do. I don't even know what to say. I don't even know who to be about this right now. And I'm just going to say it's like a plethora of tools and perspectives and shifts and energy work and breathing and tapping and all kinds of things that are resources for people, that's all they're looking for. I really truly believe that we get it. We're like, okay, it's killing us, right? And I do understand that you have to have the experience of loss. And Paula, I think for you and I've always like jumped over that. I go like, okay, so let's look at the happy part and move on. Like, it was great knowing them, or it was right, or it's this or something better. And so I think it's going to be really interesting for you and I to be in this conversation.
True.
But more importantly, you really have been my go-to guide when I go, oh my God, what a human being I am, and I'm lost. I'm absolutely lost. And I told you this before. I used to go to your website all the time and just go to YouTube and pull out these exercises out, like in the moment, like tunnel vision. How I need help right now. And Paula, you've always been there for me for that. And it pivots perspective. It pivots perspective in a way that allows me to feel fulfilled and expanded out of grief. So that's huge.
You just said that. You said that so beautifully. And
I can't repeat it. That was just like literally.
All right. It's recorded. But it made my heart think, yes, that's what we want to do for the listeners. That's what we
More
want
people need to know. I can't keep hoarding you to myself for things like this. I mean, your books are out there, wonderful, you know, and the book about what to say.
Saying the right thing when you don't know what to do.
Are you
Say.
kidding me? This should be, everybody should own this. This should be part of schooling. Or deprogramming or whatever. I mean,
well, I have
you
no
know.
problem with that happening.
Yeah.
That works
Yeah.
for me.
No, I'm really excited about this, Paula. I'm excited to that you're actually putting it out there. I know that grief tends to sound like, who wants to sign in for grief, right?
Exactly.
And the experience is meeting you where you are in that, allowing you to experience it and expand and get the benefits of being there, and the connection with your loved ones, or the loss, the joy of the job that you had, or who you were before you retired, or you know, like your new identity. There's a lot of, believe me, it's not, it's really the access to a lot of what I love about life.
Well, I look forward to next week when we will begin our little journey through grief and the holidays.
Yeah, I'm very excited to be with you.
Thank you. I could, of course, as we have done before, sit all afternoon and talk with you, Ellen, but
I know, right?
We're going to have to close this show now. But I want to thank you so much for helping me reflect on some of the amazing people that we got to learn from this last fall. And I look forward to what we're going to do this winter in terms of helping people with this journey through grief.
And thank you for helping me along the way. Yay.
So thank you to all of you for being with us. Remember, you can hear Change It Up Radio on every major podcast platform. And we have a YouTube channel where the video of this show lives. Please don't forget to like us and subscribe so we can get the latest shows to you. And we're really looking forward to you being with us next week when we start talking about grief and the holidays. So until then, thanks for being with us. See you next week. Bye-bye.